we're constantly looking for good writers, because if you have a good writer who can convey that message easily and it's fun to read, it just makes that content across the board better. The other part of the kind of puzzle that most people don't think about is that once you have a customer and they are on your blog, or at least on your site and working within your brand, they're way more likely to come back to your content if they have.
Welcome to another episode with your co-hosts, Scott Brandley and myself, DJ Sprague. We're excited you're here because we have a special guest who will share blogging and content strategies for SEO to improve your organic traffic. And be sure to stay to the end because we're going to ask Steven the $1 million question, and he has some free, helpful assets for you. So stay tuned. And Scott, if you will, please introduce our special guest, Steven.
Hey, Steven, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. Nice to be here.
Steven Schneider is the co-founder and CEO at TrioSEO, a blog writing agency that helps online businesses scale organic traffic and use their blog to generate qualified leads through high intent content. That's cool.
And Steven has a really unique story about how he got into SEO. So would you share that with us?
Back long ago in college, I was on the MBA finance fast track and was just kind of going to school because I knew that it was the right thing to do. And while having some classes with a friend of mine, he just kind of like subtly dropped that he was a business owner. And I was like, whatever. Yeah, I'm sure. Let's hear it. He told me about SEO and kind of showed me that he was building these niche affiliate sites on the side and was already generating like upwards of $10,000 per month. And so by that rate, I was kind of sold and scrapped all means of being a good student, like obviously finished and got my degree, but went from front of classroom taking notes to back of classroom building websites during class, and quickly just absorbed every ounce of SEO that I could. And he and I started building sites, and we merged with one of his partners, different trio. Actually, that was the first trio. But yeah, we, flash forward, had about 40 different websites in our portfolio. We produced 300 to 400 articles per month and grew that to 7 figures. So it was a pretty wild ride.
Nice. So you talked about kind of your roots. What do you do different now? Like what's your approach to SEO today as opposed to when you started?
Not a lot, to be honest. I mean, everyone thinks that there's this magic secret sauce when it comes to SEO. And, what we've put to the test and seen come true and true again is that it's just the same thing over and over again, and kind of really honing in on the basics and doing the basics well. I think the difference nowadays is that there's even more of an importance around quality and transparency and trust across the site. And so when focusing on different components, looking at those metrics like your experience, your authoritativeness, your trustworthiness, and just making sure that people who come to the site are well aware who's writing the content, what is your authority behind what you're speaking to, and just knowing that it's not, some random blog, it's actually a brand and there's an author behind it. So, I mean, the basics are the same, but I think just upgrading the user experience and the transparency across the board.
So you say that as if like just in passing, like an experience versus a blog, but that's a really big differentiation,
What about blogging today? Is it still relevant? You hear a lot of SEOs and a lot of buzz around, well, blogging really isn't as relevant today as it was 5 years ago. What's your take on that?
Obviously, I'm a little biased. I think it's still relevant, but I think at the end of it, there's a lot more to unpack outside of a random article generating top of funnel content. So the two main things that we like to speak to are, obviously including a mixture of funnel topics. So we're going to go after bottom funnel, we're going to go after mid funnel, and, specifically target that bottom funnel content first. But the other side of it is just the topical authority or, your general authority. So as you start developing more and more content and publish more content on your site, Google starts to pick up on that and starts to recognize you as a key player in that industry. And so you actually increase your chances of performing better with SEO the more content you have, because you can internal link that content and just start to show Google that, hey, I'm an expert on this space, so please show my content to more people. And they definitely react, accordingly.
Yeah, that's a strategy that we use with our Q&A tool. So what are your takes on AI? How do you see that helping SEO?
I think it's a tool. I don't think it's a replacement. And I think that right now people are very antsy to see how quickly they can produce quantity instead of quality. And I think it's a pretty risky game right now. We don't publish any AI content. We don't even write AI content. Everything's 100% human written and human edited. And I think that people who are choosing to go down the path of AI content should be aware that that's a high risk. Google just came out with that algorithm update, and it was specifically to target spam content. And so, not knowing where the line in the sand is drawn when it comes to AI content, we're kind of just like, okay, let's take a step back and see where the dust settles. But right now, like, we don't want to jeopardize our clients' content and their brand just to publish a few extra articles per month. So we'd rather play the slow, methodical, strategic, sustainable game than pump out a lot of content and then be penalized. So
Smart.
But going on to the next kind of area, since we've talked about blogs and content, what are some of the big mistakes people make in writing articles?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake that I've seen is that content is not presented in a conversational tone. I think that because we're people and, we're reading and writing to humans, people often overlook that. And so just like we're having a conversation right now, that's going to look and feel much different than if I sent you a handwritten message. And it's really hard to get good conversational tones across in blogs or any copy for that matter. But the easier you can convey a message as if I'm talking to you just like I am right now, the better that content is going to, stick with it. And they're easily going to digest whatever you're trying to get across. And they're just going to want to stay on the page longer.
Right, exactly. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Why do you still want a good writer to lead your SEO?
Yeah, so this is a hard one. This is something that we're constantly looking for good writers, because going back to that conversational tone, if you have a good writer who can convey that message easily and it's fun to read, it just makes that content across the board better. The other part of the kind of puzzle that most people don't think about is that once you have a customer and they are on your blog, or at least on your site and working within your brand, they're way more likely to come back to your content if they have something to refer back to and kind of like make that first impression really stick. So, once you have a good writer on your team, like, never let them go, pretty much.
So moving on to the big question, how do you integrate strategy into the content to actually generate leads and not just traffic? But at the end of the day, obviously, it's all about conversion, right? Whether it's a conversion to a lead, a download, signing up for a newsletter, or buying a product, the goal is a conversion. So how do you integrate your strategy into ultimately getting that conversion?
Two core parts, I would say. The first part is going to be within the strategy and the planning phase. And so a lot of that comes back to figuring out what the core topics are, or the primary keywords that you're going to set out to tackle, whether that's the title of an article or the title of a service page and a landing page, and then you're going to go from there. Once you've identified those keywords, you're going to likely sort them based on the funnel segments. So, bottom funnel, mid, top, all that sort of stuff, and then target high intent first and just strictly go after the best bang for your buck. Once that content is written and on your site, the next thing is going to be optimizing it for conversion. And this is where a lot of the CRO and UX stuff of the on-page SEO comes into play. So, for example, with all of our clients, we give them a free CRO and UX audit. And what this does is we run through every single page of their website and just say, here are the suggestions that we think would really benefit your site. And this is not something that we'll do. It's out of scope, but it's a free kind of audit to say, change this heading, change these colors, make a pop-up here, add a CTA here. And over time, you start to optimize your funnel above the fold, or pop-ups if they're trying to leave, adding exit intent pop-ups, adding sidebar widgets, footer insertions, all these little things that people really need in order to kind of drive and move the needle for conversion. But it's not just let it sit and let it do its job. Like, it's a full-time job to ensure that once the people are on the site, what are you going to do in order to convert them through that funnel and close the deal?
Yeah, that makes sense. So because of your experience in the affiliate space, you guys have also worked on actual conversion and driving the clicks. So it sounds like you bring a lot of that expertise and insights and experience to your SEO clients, not just here's the content, good luck, but here's the content and here's where it's going to fit in the conversion funnel. And here's some ways to improve the engagement and the conversions, whether it be micro or macro conversions. Would that be accurate?
100%. I mean, at the end of the day, we always like to say, SEO is useless if it doesn't actually do anything for your business.
Extending from there, Steven, how do you form a content strategy? We talked about top funnel versus bottom funnel. We talked about driving conversions, engagement, leads, results. So when you look at a website and you're talking to let's say a new client, how are you going to form a content strategy looking at a new site with a new client and walk away with, here are the things we're going to do, execute, recommend, and create to drive that measurable lift in either be conversions, revenue, or both?
So before we even sign a client, we always have a discovery audit. And this is just our way to do our due diligence and our homework before we set up any sort of agreement or strategy. And what we do when we walk through this discovery audit is kind of a preliminary strategy, or what we kind of look at as a phase one. So we do competitor research and we take a look at the organic competitors within their space or any of the keywords that they would potentially want to go after, and just see how authoritative those competitors are, like how likely are you to kind of compete with them and just even enter the top 10 ranks for a given set of keywords. And then from there, we just take a look at what they're currently ranking for. And one, does it align with their brand? Sometimes we've done an audit and they have random content and it just doesn't make sense to the brand. And so kind of backtracking that and figuring out where does it actually make sense to go from here and where do you kind of currently stand? And then taking that one step further, once we've done those two parts, we'll take a gap analysis approach and just say, where are the opportunities from here? And then kind of diving back to that funnel. We organize all of the opportunities based on top, mid, and bottom so that they can clearly see kind of what our approach would be, and then just kind of summarizing the notes and the findings. So that audit really helps us just determine, one, is it a good fit for us? And is this going to be a good relationship for the both of us to kind of set, our sights on? And then pretty much the strategy from there on out is just a more involved going down the rabbit hole sort of approach of how many keywords can we find? What are the core pillars? Who are the core customers? What are they looking for? Just really kind of diving under the hood in terms of the psychology of their ideal customer and how they're thinking and what they're looking for.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you're taking a more custom approach.
Yeah, exactly.
How important are backlinks in that approach?
Very important. So we don't build any backlinks, like we'll offer advice, but during that process of kind of looking at the authority of the current or the new client and their competitors, we take a look at, do they actually have the backlink profile to compete within this space? And so if it's a little bit more competitive out the gate, we think that, they're out of reach or they're right on the cusp, we'll tell them straight up like, hey, this might not be a good fit for you at this time, but if you're willing to invest, some time and energy into building those backlinks, we can also do our work and we can kind of hit the ground running together. But typically it's a lot easier said than done. And so if people don't have the time or resources to devote into building backlinks, then, they're kind of at an uphill battle with getting the content on their site and just being realistic with the expectations that it could just take longer to rank.
Yeah. I'm sure the goal is to create backlink worthy content though, right? So infographics, micrographics, original data, research, original content, approaches, strategies to the content so that it is backlink worthy.
Yeah, definitely.
Would that be fair?
Yeah, obviously quality is always the name of the game, but just with how SEO is shaping nowadays, I think that it's very difficult to get those organic backlinks just strictly through having good content. Like I wish that was still the case, but it's just not. People are really only linking to external resources that move the needle for the authority. So it's going to be like journals or statistical research from some sort of white paper or Forbes or New York Times, like things that actually have a lot of authority because Google trusts those. And so, yeah, it's definitely this uphill battle, but there's still some tricks to getting some good links, I would say.
All right. What's the best piece of advice you can give to someone considering doing SEO for their site?
I would say just be realistic in the timeline at which you're looking at. Whatever it is, probably 2 or 3x the results and what you're thinking. So, we always say expect some sort of movement within 60 to 90 days of our strategy, but don't expect to start generating a ton of money or a ton of top line revenue from that. So obviously SEO is a game of delayed gratification. And so with that, the more time and resources and energy you put into SEO, it kind of has this compounding snowball effect. So you might have this really slow uphill tick for the first 6 to 9 months, but look back 12, 16, 18 months later, and it kind of starts to do this 2, 3, 4, 6x approach. And you look back 2, 3 years later and you're like, wow, I'm so glad I started when I did. But if you're just going into it saying like, let's see what we can do in 60 days and just leaving it at that, I don't think you're really setting yourself or your brand up for success that way.
So how do you convince clients to play the long game?
That's a good question. That's a very hard one. We typically don't work with people who have a short-term mindset. So we're just straight up with them and say like, people come to us and they're like, yeah, let's see what we can do from 30 days. And we're like, this isn't going to work because that's not the game. You just have to have a long-term mindset and you have to be willing to invest in it and look at it as an investment. It's still insanely ROI positive if you look over a 12 to 24 month period. But I always like to tell people, you didn't get into business to get short-term results. You're in business because you're looking at a 5-10 year plus investment in your business. And so if that is the mindset and the theory, there's no difference here. And so usually vets people pretty easily.
That's always the tough part because people even say, yeah, I'm in it for the long term. 6 months later, I'm done. They just want to see that ROI, even though they mentally stated from the beginning, I get it. It's a long play, but man, is it tough to stay in it for the long play. So what are some of those for an e-commerce website specifically? What is some of that bottom funnel content where you can show a relatively quick ROI so that people can justify the long-term investment and stay with it?
Yeah. So that really comes down to the topic. I mean, every niche has its own bottom funnel content, but it's really going to be, like anything that has to do with costs or sizing or shipping or like anything that has state or city requirements in it, like things that are more closely aligned with where they get to use or feel and interact with the end product or service. And so, especially with e-commerce, if they don't have a handful of landing pages, it's like, okay, let's immediately just create these landing pages, get that set, create service or category pages, hub pages, all the things that are closely aligned to all of the, I guess, the core nuts and bolts of that search intent, and just making sure that everything is, highly focused from the get-go, because more common than not, they might have a lot of product on their site, but they're just missing a handful of keywords that are kind of wrangling up those categories to kind of focus content together. So yeah, I mean, and blog content's the same way. It's like, where do we look at the human psychology and the search intent? And then how do we kind of like work backwards to ensure that if you're on this article, it makes sense to focus a product or focus a call to action, et cetera, et cetera.
That makes sense. So you're looking at a new client or prospective client, and it's an e-commerce website. What are the top 3 things you're going to look at or look for to determine the strategy, the goals, and whether or not it's even going to work for them and if you're going to be a good fit?
Yeah. So first off, I'm looking at their authority in the space and just kind of, what do they bring to the table from their backlink profile and who are their competitors? Like, what are the high level categories that they're trying to rank for? E-commerce is a really interesting SEO space because there's a lot of opportunity between the categories or like the hub pages that you would typically try to rank a group of products for. But there's also a lot of like long tail keyword opportunity within the products themselves. And so one, just are they hitting the marks on the high intent kind of long tail keywords that are, easily attached to revenue? And then the other side is how can they capture the wins across the board for the broader, parent topics that have a lot of traffic attached to them. So just quickly seeing like where they stand on those 2 core aspects, or like you can learn a lot from that. And then the other thing just ties back to CRO, UX, like does their site look like it was built in 1997? That's probably a big red flag. Do they have all these like standard CTAs and like EAT metrics that we look at? Any way we can build in a quick wins for clients and just help them, turn their site around in 30 days is a win for them and a win for us. And then obviously the last part would just be how much runway they have and how much we can quickly tack on the site to ensure that they're still seeing success, month over month.
Great. So in those scenarios, would you have a fee for services where you can go in and provide a real assessment of their content strategy, their keywords, their opportunities for the keywords that they're missing, the gap analysis, and provide a valuable report pre-engagement? Or let's say they don't want to engage, they just want you to come in and kind of give them a health report and prioritize what they need to do before they actually decide to engage.
Yeah, so that kind of ties back to that discovery audit. It's a multi-page pretty fleshed out report, and we just kind of run through that. It takes one of our, depending on who's doing it, it takes anywhere from 2 to 3 hours to do. So it's definitely not a quick, snapshot of their site. Like, we're actually doing our homework and, going through all the nuts and bolts. And then we send that to them and they can kind of decide where it sits. Like, that's theirs to keep. We don't do one-off strategies. It's something that we're on the fence about and kind of thinking through, because we've had some interest with a couple of people reaching out to us. So I don't want to say it's not off our ideas, or, it could happen very easily. But like I said, we can offer all the suggestions in the world. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So we've learned that if someone's coming to us asking for an audit, they typically don't have the team or resources and strategy in place to see it through. And that's why they came to us to begin with. And so sure, you can have the audit. There's, a handful of free keywords. Here's all this opportunity. But just like when you create a course or do anything, actually seeing it through to the finish line is kind of where that, magic secret sauce starts to flourish and you start to see the results.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. $1 million question. We ask every guest at the end of the podcast. As an expert in your industry, what's one actionable strategy that you think would have the biggest impact for an e-commerce brand in SEO?
I think the biggest actionable piece of advice I would give is to sign up for a legit keyword tool, not ChatGPT. So use something like Ahrefs or SEMrush and get your hands dirty. If you're just strictly trying to cut corners and go to ChatGPT, like, that's not real keyword research. The benefit of learning one of those tools is that you can cut out someone like me who's been using it for 10 years and, kind of trying to figure out yourself. But you can look at competitor information. You can look at link building strategies and metrics. You can look at keyword opportunities. Like, there's so much within that tool, and just spending an hour or two per day can get you pretty far. So I'm always one of those people, like, if you're going to do something, and action's always better than just reading about it or reading an article. Like, sign up, you get a 7-day trial on most platforms, and see what you can do. Like, run a free audit report on your own website, see where your broken links are, see where your backlinks aren't, look at the keyword opportunities. Like, if you're interested in SEO, but don't have the funds or are still on the fence about it to invest in an agency like us, see how far you can get by yourself. And at some point you can always come to us for the rest. But I think you'd be surprised by how little effort it takes to make some quick wins on your own site.
Well said. Well said. Thank you. So we did say that you had some special offers and opportunities. So we'll put the links in the show notes, but tell us about the free SEO SOP toolkit.
Yeah, so this is something that we put together when we first launched. We're actually in the process of revamping it. So anybody who downloads the current version will also get the updated version. But myself and my partner, Connor Gillivan, who's also a top SEO, we are very active on LinkedIn. And so the first gen version of the SOP download is a roundup of all of our favorite LinkedIn posts. They're going to be very actionable, very DIY focused, and things that you can actually learn from within our content. And then what we're doing now is actually taking the real life legit SOPs that we use to run TrioSEO, and we're giving them to people for free. So we're going to round up the ones that are the most impactful and the most meaningful to try to learn this themselves and then give them away for free. So if that's of interest, or you feel like you want to DIY some of your SEO, that's where to go.
So what's the best way for our audience to get in touch with your firm?
Yeah, so you can go to TrioSEO.com and look us up. You can also Google TrioSEO. We'll come up some way, shape, or form. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active, Steven Schneider. And any way you look for us will probably find us.
Fantastic. Well, we really appreciate your time and all of your wisdom, sharing your history, your strategies, the gotchas, what to do, what not to do. I'm sure our audience will find it very, very helpful. And until next time, have a great day.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So nice.